Hey baby, I hear those blues a calling. It's time for the Frasier on Frasier podcast. Welcome. I am your host, Adam Frasier, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Mr. Wes Corwin. How you doing, Wes?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing, Adam?
I'm doing well, thank you for asking. So, we have just watched season one, episode 4 of Frasier, titled "I Hate Frasier Crane."
I hate Frazier Crane is the title of this episode. It is. Go ahead.
I mean, and it's a pretty straightforward premise. Frasier gets in sort of a battle of words with Derek Mann, who's who writes a column in the Seattle newspaper. He says that he hates Frasier Crane. Frasier,
But here's the interesting thing, and one thing, and we're going to cover, I think, a couple things in the episode. But he writes a 4-word article. We don't see the newspaper, so we don't know if it's like a comment. So if it's like local thoughts, because he apparently has a column, and he wrote a 4-word...
It's called Man About Town is the name of the column.
Derek
so,
Mann's...
I mean, presumably it can just be about anything.
It can be about anything you want.
That is experienced about, as told by Derek Mann.
But usually when you're a newspaper columnist, you have like a word count. You have a deadline and a quota. You have to fill up words. You have to put words on a page to get paid. And he wrote a 4-word column, and it just read, "I hate Frasier Crane." And Niles decided to highlight it in yellow, which is fun.
So Niles shows Frasier this article over. They're having dinner over at Frasier's place.
Mm-hmm.
Niles comes over, and he shows them the article, and Frasier is... At first, he tries to play it off. He plays it cool. He says he doesn't really care that this random guy would use his platform in the newspaper to say, "Oh, I hate Frasier Crane." But then we slowly see it kind of seep in, and like he gets it. It gradually becomes more and more of a bother to him.
It is one of the most fun things about the Frasier character that he immediately states, "Here's what I'll do. Here's the mature thing to do," and not more than 10 seconds later, he's resorting to the childish behavior he just said he'd make a point to avoid. He folded up the newspaper. He said, "Thank you very much for the note, Niles. I appreciate you sending me the paper," and he immediately goes on a I mean,
I feel like that's pretty much a sitcom character 101.
Yep. It's very fun.
So of course Frasier gets back at Mann, so to speak. Mm-hmm. He criticizes the article on his radio show.
Yes.
He gives sort of a scathing, very very sarcastic.
He delivers kind of a spicy tirade using a lot of. I'm sure you noticed, but while we were watching the episode, I googled the word trenchant. Good.
I did notice that. I didn't realize that was because that was something he said in his rant, though. That was something you were randomly doing.
That wasn't what I was doing in my personal time. That's Frasier is definitely it's a show. I'm not ashamed to admit every once in a while I'm like, this is good dialogue. What does this word mean? And one of the words...
It is one of those... It's like, when you were in English class, when you were in school, they had you read through, Catcher in the Rye or, 1984 and, highlight all the different vocabulary words. So Frasier's great for that.
Frasier's pretty solid. Pretty good at that word choice.
So yeah, he goes on his show. He has his little spiel about Derek Mann, and the next day, Mann responds as, I mean, you would kind of expect,
right?
Yeah, he kind of rather than his very brief 4-word article saying "I hate Frasier Crane," he dedicates more than just that one sentence to
He
explaining why he hates
he unleashes a
Frasier
full 2-section thing that it has to be continued on page 12, which presumably, like, given how a newspaper works, if it's on page, it's got to be pretty close to the front of the paper to have to be continued in the 12s. He apparently lambasts Frasier, does a whole point-by-point dissection of everything irritating and awful about his show, which is it's an interesting criticism. You'd think it would that it actually paints a very vivid picture, because one thing about Frasier is you can't sit through a full episode, but you can get a vibe, given the minute-long increments we do see, what a full, like, hour, 2 hour, however long Frasier's time slot is, how it could possibly be grating on somebody that's looking to be very irritated by Frasier Crane. And it's a fun little diatribe about his sanctimonious, pompous style, and how often, and you do see it. You definitely see it in the pilot, how he decides to listen to somebody's problem and use it as a springboard to talk about his own life. And
Right.
it's fun to hear those things and be like, yeah, that works as a host, and hear somebody else's perspective that it makes for a garbage program.
Which, I mean, I think you could legitimately argue that if Frasier Crane was an actual person, he would be very annoying.
Oh, of course. Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I mean, there'll be plenty. I mean, we haven't really seen a whole lot of this, but I mean, in Cafe Nervosa alone, you know, he is always having a conversation way louder than the rest of the patrons.
He just yelled at a server, like, just for walking up and asking if he could help them with anything. And the comic misunderstood.
Well, he was talking about Derek Mann then.
Right,
yes,
but then the guy was like, the guy was just like, that's what I, and then he yelled at him again, like, we don't want anything, get out of here, which is a crazy thing to do to somebody trying to serve be a barrister in a coffee shop.
I think my favorite part of the Derek Mann article was where he, oh God, what was the line? it was where he says one wonders if the man graduated from medical school or some mind controlling cult.
Right.
And he says that of his voice, his tone of voice on his radio program, which, I mean, Kelsey Grammer has a very soothing type of voice. He gets a lot of voice acting roles, I feel, because of that.
Sure, absolutely.
I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
So, of course, Frasier once again says that he's not going to retaliate.
No.
Best response is no response at all. Cut to him in the radio station giving a response.
Absolutely.
On the radio program, talking about, again, how terrible Derek Mann is and his column.
Yeah.
To the point where he's pretty much neglecting his actual, like, callers.
Mm-hmm. People are calling in and trying to talk about their problems with delayed gratification, and he's insisting that they have to wait so he can get out this whole diatribe about Derek Mann, which is very funny.
And I asked you when we were watching it how you thought it was going to escalate from here.
Right.
And I don't think you really got a chance to answer, but we find out pretty soon. It
went straight into a fight. Derek Mann calls into the program, at which point I audibly gasped and went, "Oh, Derek Mann," because and he insists. Apparently, he's listening to Dr. Crane's program, which is a way to get a listener, is to feud with one of them. I personally am looking forward to feuding with one of our podcast listeners to guarantee that they listen to every episode and find out how much we hate them.
Right, we're going to find, after this, we're going to go into the YouTube comments and find someone who doesn't like us, and
and then we're going to go on their YouTube videos and comment on
we're going to bait them into calling into the program.
Nobody likes your cat videos, Margaret, and I feel like that'll end then we get into a fight with her, and that'll be fun. But, so Derek he calls up Frasier, and he insists he's a coward, and he wants to fight him at the square, apparently, just outside of the coffee shop, out of Cafe Nervosa, and they're gonna get into fisticuffs. And Frazier's like, at first he tries to, once again, Frazier's whole deal is he tries to like play it off. He's like, no, I'm gonna do the mature thing. I'm not gonna fight you. We're both adults. And then 8 callers insist he's a chicken, and he immediately goes back on his word and says, "You want to fight? I'll give you a fight."
It's the Marty McFly school character motivation.
Nobody calls me chicken. Yeah, that was a terrible. Here's the thing. I think I could do an okay Michael J. Fox, but I think he has a different voice for nobody calls me chicken. I'm not gonna try it. That's not this kind of podcast. So he talks to Derek Mann. He takes a commercial break and then gets back on with Derek Mann, and they agree to a fight, Kinsley Square, which we didn't Google. Is that a real?
I Googled it. I didn't find anything of relevant, and I'm assuming because the place is directly outside of Cafe Nervosa, they didn't want to pick an actual location.
Yeah. So apparently there's the Elliott Bay Cafe, which is the inspiration for Cafe Nervosa, and outside of that is Pioneer Square. So it seemed like a situation where they changed the names and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So not an interesting aside. I apologize for taking that detour. So Frazier gets home. First, and I feel like this is important, this also was in the first act, and it comes back up in the second act. Martin spends his downtime when he's not, doing retiree stuff, hanging out with the boys at the bar, having a couple brewskis. He will, as the elderly do, he has to have a hobby, and he likes to look through photos of an old case file about the Flower Lotus murderer, a murderer that killed a hooker. It's the one crime that Martin's never solved. It's his one-armed man. To reference Harrison Ford in The Fugitive. It's the one thing that he's never understood. That's not actually how the one-armed man works, but it's his meaning. It's something he's trying to do in his age. Is he's trying to figure out who killed this poor hooker.
Go ahead. And I will say that this is actually not the last time that we hear about this particular case that Martin is trying to solve.
Go ahead.
I think the details of it change between this episode and the episode where they bring it back up again and decide to flesh it out a little bit more.
I hope the details are revealed just about every episode from here. I hope that everyone's a suspect. I hope Frasier is a 11 season long whodunit all about this murder. I hope it never stops coming up. Is the Flower Lotus murderer? Why did it explain why the murderer is the Flower Lotus murderer?
No, I don't think it did.
The Weeping Lotus murder. Excuse me, I just saw it in the script. The Weeping Lotus. It never covered what the Weeping Lotus is.
I don't think we ever hear it called that again.
Oh, come on. That's disappointing.
Unless there is another separate murder that Martin is trying to solve in his retirement that he couldn't solve as a cop. I'm assuming it's the same case, and yeah, they just don't necessarily count on, people binge watching this show and being, super, into the details of how they're setting this up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that does get brought up in this episode, and
in the first act it gets brought up. And then gets elaborated on in Act 2, where he's sitting there and he's looking over pictures, and Daphne it's revealed. And before, Daphne's powers have kind of been played off in a goof sort of way. She looks at this picture and immediately knows the name of the victim, and he's like, what's up?
Helen. That's the name of the hooker.
The name of the murderer. The name of the victim. You're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And
Helen isn't the murderer.
Not the murderer. Or is it? Is it a case where she was murdered by a different Helen? We don't know, and we won't know until we watch more of the show. I assume there's a reveal, and it's a big part of the show from here on out. But then Daphne looks at the picture and says another fact, that there were a lot of men in her life, and Martin says, "Oh yeah, of course she was a hooker." And Daphne was like, "No, she had 4 brothers," which Martin's mind is at that point blown. So Daphne has successfully predicted 2 things in a row, and then he's like, "Go on, tell me more." And she goes into her psychic Vision, she goes into her mind, a la That's So Raven, but before That's So Raven, where she pictures the murder and pictures a man in a trench coat, and he's opening a door, and then Frazier opens the door, and it's very funny, and definitely doesn't mean that at some point it will be revealed that Frazier is in fact the murderer and killed a woman at age
Well,
12.
right, because yeah, it couldn't have been Frazier because he was a child when this murder took place.
Yeah.
Um, that said, I mean, I do feel like this is probably one of the better examples of Daphne, I guess, demonstrating actual psychic ability.
Right. And I
mean,
yeah, it's very possible Daphne didn't predict that Frazier is the killer, but I theorize, and if you pay attention to the details, okay, we'll get there. I'm sorry. Frazier and Martin Martin is very proud of Frazier because he talked back to the guy and he agreed to the fight, and Frazier's like, well, I'm not actually going to fight the guy, and Martin gets disappointed and he brings up this time Billy
Kriesel.
Billy Kriesel, who was this kid that was picking on no, he was picking on Frazier for the patches on his sports coat, and then
Right.
Frazier got back at Kriesel for his crew cut, and then Kriesel challenged him to a fight, and Frazier couldn't go because he had a clarinet lesson. Now, here's my theory. Is it possible that the clarinet lesson was an alibi while Frazier murdered Helen in the Weeping Lotus case? And is it all going to play out and be revealed over the
We're
next...
going to find out that Helen died. Someone, like, shoved a clarinet down her...
Yeah.
down
We've
her
never
throat.
done the autopsy before there was a... We thought she was strangled. She was, by a clarinet in her esophagus. That is the show.
I will say this also, going back to Daphne's psychic prediction, talking about the man getting off the elevator. She mentions she also sees him walking down a very long hallway, and of course the joke is that the person she's tuning into winds up being Frazier.
Yes.
That said, the elevator that Frazier usually takes to get to his apartment is directly across the hall from his apartment. So he shouldn't have to be walking down any long hallway to get to his apartment. I don't know. I thought I'd point that out.
That's a fair point. That is a great point. Somebody definitely didn't do enough research mapping out the Frazier complex when they wrote this script. So Frazier insists he's not gonna get into a fight, or he tells Martin that he won't be happy until he comes home with a black eye, and then Martin insists that, like, all of Frazier's pompousing, all of his medical school and how smart he is and how nice his apartment is all one big clarinet lesson, all an excuse not to be a man, kind of. And then he says, "I can't even look at you." Interesting.
Which is it's a bit dramatic, I think. Like,
yeah, that is it's a little much. It's kind of a little much.
I mean, I don't know, putting yourself in Martin's place, do you think you would have... I mean, I don't think I would, like, if I had a kid, if I had a small child,
Yeah.
I wouldn't, like, be encouraging them to fight.
If I was Frazier's father today, if he was 42 and I am 27 now, and he were to get home from his radio show, and I assume I made mac and cheese for him to help him cool down after a tough day at the radio station, and he told me that he was going to get into a fight, and I would say, Frazier, you call that boy right now and you apologize. We don't fight in the Frazier Corwin home. That's what we do. We settle our words with more words. Frazier, you know that. And yeah.
I mean, I guess it is a little different that he's an adult man, like,
right, exactly.
It's his adult son. I mean, because once you're an adult, I mean,
yeah, as a kid I would be like, hey, don't get into a fight. Fights are dumb. As an adult, I would be like, wait, you guys are fighting each other because of a thing on the radio? This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Why are you doing this? One of you is a radio show host, the other's a newspaper columnist. You both have the dumbest jobs in the world. Like, neither of you are gonna have a job in, like, 2011. Just invest in other shit and enjoy it while you can. Why are you fist fighting each other outside of a coffee shop, you dummies? Is how I feel about it.
I mean, you're thinking of it in the long term.
Right, because I think I feel like anybody getting
You have
into
to
a
think of
fight.
it like a '90s man, Wes.
I mean, but I feel like if you any fight is incredibly short term. Like I've got to beat him up, or otherwise people won't think I'm cool or tough. None of it matters. At some point, we all go in the ground. Is my theory, but
you're sort of a nihilist.
I'm a fight nihilist. I don't think I'm ever going to be asked to commentate at a UFC fight because it's going to be like, wow, what an uppercut, and I'm going to be like, of course, none of it matters because at some point the sun's going to stop it shining, and we're all going to be dead. And Joe Rogan's going to go like, that's wild, man, and he's probably going to lean into like an earpiece and ask if somebody can get me out of the booth. It's a fun note that I just read in the script. I don't know what NB is short for, but apparently Billy Kriesel is the name of a boy who bullied the director David Lee in the 6th grade, and it came up in the script, and I think that's fun.
Huh.
Yeah. I'm not good at...
is that his actual name?
Yeah, apparently Billy Kriesel is the name of the boy who bullied director...
Are you allowed to do that?
I think as long as you don't say, like, Billy Kriesel of Columbus, Ohio, I think you can name something a person...
Did he also make fun of David Lee's elbow patches?
That's a great question, and I can't be sure. I bet that's why it came up. I bet this entire episode is a self-insert for David Lee.
So we finally get to the fight.
I'm so sorry. We're almost to the fight. Apparently,
yes.
Billy Kriesel. So I searched Billy Kriesel to get I searched Billy Kriesel to be like to try and find out if there was a real Billy Kriesel and if he ever got interviewed. And instead, I found an article, or I found a Reddit from our Frazier. Hopefully, we plug them and they plug us. Would be great. There was a list of favorite quotes. Billy Kriesel is going to come up apparently multiple times. Apparently, he is a significant chunk of Frasier's backstory and modus operandi. Everything, Billy Kriesel is going to come up a significant amount.
I think that is actually true, yes. I'm trying to remember. I know there is an episode. I'm trying to think it's the same one that I'm thinking of. We'll find out, I'm sure.
Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt. We get to the fight. We get to fighting.
Yes.
We do some fighting. Frazier is at Cafe Nervosa, and Roz is trying to tell him a fun story about a toothless garbage man giving her a wink, and she was into it until he was missing teeth, and trying to help him not think about the fact he's about to get his ass kicked by a newspaper columnist. And the entire time I'm thinking, obviously the joke is that like both of these guys are dumb, and it turns like because I've been fortunate to be interviewed by a number of newspaper columnists, and I can't speak for the ones I've spoken to over the phone. Anytime I meet somebody on the newspaper, they always have like a nice face, and they're the tiniest people. They're just very small. So I was thinking the joke would obviously be, oh, Frasier. Like I don't know if we would like to compare shows on this Frasier podcast we have, but I was thinking it would be like the episode of Bob's Burgers where Bob is like driving through the snow and there's the guy that is hassling him in traffic, and then the guy gets out of the big 18-wheeler and it turns out he's very small and his voice is Bobcat Goldthwait. And I thought that was like, oh, it'll be funny when it turns out he's very small and neither of them want to get into a fight, but there's a big crowd around and they can't. They're going to have to like fake. Instead, the reveal is that Derek Mann is apparently massive. He writes.
You don't actually see him.
He writes a Man About Town newspaper column, and he pumps weights and does CrossFit and does that thing with the tractor tire where you lift it up over the side and push it again. So he is built of stone and marble, and he is gonna just murder Frasier Crane outside of a coffee shop. For some reason, this big boy has decided to fight a local radio host for fun. So
he was dissing him.
He was dissing his radio show and calling him not a man. So with that flimsy manhood challenge, he decides to challenge Frasier, and now they're both getting into a fight.
And there's a mariachi band.
We're so close to that. Hold it. I do want to cover right before Frazier steps outside. Martin comes up to Frazier, and he's very proud that Frazier's going to show up and stand up for himself. Gives him a couple notes. Remember, it's a street fight, not a boxing match, so you're going to want to swing first. And Daphne also tells him to aim for the Netherds and cites an instance of a man in Britain. Now, I don't know if David Lee, the director, kicked a man named Nigel Travers in the balls, and that's how that came up. I don't know how that name was chosen. I don't even know if there's a note. I don't see a note for it. Apparently, Nigel Travers is just a British-sounding name. Maybe David Lee knows Nigel Travers.
Nigel is, I think, one of... Well, I guess it's not the same Nigel, but Nigel is the name of one of Daphne's brothers.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if it's like a half-brother situation, and that was Nigel. I wonder. In Manchester, that's where she grew up, so maybe.
I mean, it's probably not.
I see. Okay, we're at the point. Frazier goes outside. He takes off his sports coat. He gets outside. And you could say symbolically taking off the sports coat is taking off his childish fears and trying to step up and be a man. A la the moment where he was wearing the sports coat and was made fun of. If you wanted to draw those comparisons, of course you could.
Right.
Frazier goes outside. He's about to get into a fight. And a mariachi band starts playing, which is delightful. There is a large crowd in Seattle that has shown up for this fight between a local newspaper columnist and a local radio show host, because there's 90s.
There's apparently nothing else going on in Seattle.
In the 90s, newspaper columnists and radio hosts had enough pull to draw a massive crowd for an unplanned, unpromoted fight, which is incredibly 90s. By the time 2002 rolled around, no one would listen to either of these mediums, and there would be 5 people outside, and maybe a mariachi band that was disappointed that nobody showed up. There's a mariachi. The second Frazier steps outside, so I assume the mariachi band has showed up to kind of provide him some intro music and gravitas to his entrance as he steps out of the coffee shop. Now,
it would have been great if they played like tossed salad and scrambled eggs, just a mariachi version of that.
I would love it. I would absolutely love it. Or if like the second Frazier stepped outside, you heard like a glass broke, and you hear the mariachi band playing the theme song of Stone Cold Steve Austin, would also be very good. I would be delighted by that. But just a mariachi band playing mariachi music, nothing wrong with it. They're providing ambiance. As they're about to get into a scrap, as Frazier and Derek Mann are circling, they're doing some circling to size each other up. The police show up. They break up the fight. They give Frazier a little bit of a push. And Frazier's ready to go down to the station. He's like, just let me grab my jacket. And the policemen are like, hey, we're not going to take you in. Celebrities can't get away with starting fights in this town, in Seattle, in this state. We don't cotton to fight starters around here. And Frazier's like, well, I appreciate you not taking me in. And the police leave. And Martin says, hey, you did a great job.
One of them aside.
Yeah. Martin tells him he would have won the fight for sure, and then Niles offers everyone to buy everyone celebratory lattes because Frazier stood up for himself, and that's when Martin cuts off to the side and lets the policeman know that showed up, hey, you did me a favor, thanks for showing up when you did. If you showed up a minute later, Frazier would have been a pancake. Would have been a pancake.
I wanted the mariachi band to be undercover police officers.
Yeah, that would have been something. Oh, yeah. What if it was an undercover fight situation, like the mariachi showed up and then they pulled guns and yelled "freeze"? That would have been a visual. That would have really brought something to the table. One of my favorite. This was a good, funny episode, and I'll tell you my favorite bit when we talk about our favorite bits. But I think my second favorite bit is, so I don't think we brought it up. No, we did bring it up a little bit. We talked about the fact that Martin said it was the significance of the clarinet lesson was Frazier avoided. Yeah, we did talk about it. He avoided the fight with the Kreisel boy because he had a clarinet lesson. And so Martin goes to this whole spiel. He's invited to have a beer with the policeman. Since he was an old cop, they want to hang out with him. And Martin says, "Of course, I'd love to have a drink with you, and I'll tell you why. Because the Crane boys are done with their clarinet lessons." And the other cop goes, "What?" And Martin goes, oh yeah, you're one of my precinct, and then he leaves. And it's the perfect sort of anti-joke to cap how dumb all of this was.
Yeah, this was a very. I mean, so I'm looking forward, and I think I've said this in probably one of the previous episodes we've done, but I'm looking forward to the point in the show where we get more B stories, because right now it's all very straightforward, which is fine. It's just. I mean, yeah, the stories aren't really that complex. So you don't really need to break them down that much.
Right. It is interesting. I think the show, especially since we're 4 episodes in, I definitely remember seeing that in the first season of like Star Trek: The Next Generation. Is the show would like set up all these like set pieces. It would set up all this like exposition and then pay it off, and it wouldn't leave any space for stuff to be going on in the background. And you definitely feel that a little bit with these early episodes. Is it's doing so much like setting up the relationship between Martin and Niles and Frazier and everybody in the show that it's not really leaving. It's so fun to see like the little minutia bits. It's fun to see Daphne's powers, and it's fun to learn about Martin's case or the backstory. But it's all one A story for these episodes. It will be fun to see as things sort of pile onto each other.
You do get a sort of sense for some of the other characters. I guess that's really the point of these episodes.
Yeah.
You get to hear about, Daphne, Martin, like you said. Also, Maris gets brought up at the beginning of this episode.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's good. I'm looking forward to some of. I really can't wait for us to get to some of the other episodes in the show.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we were going to talk briefly about this. I was going through the IMDb trivia page on this episode.
Yes.
And one of the bits of trivia they have on there is a fight between Frazier and Derek is broken up by cops because, quote, "we don't settle things in this town with fistfights," end quote. However, in Washington, mutually agreed combat is legal. So long as they both agreed to fight, the cops wouldn't be able to interfere, which didn't sound right to me at first, but you're telling me that that's actually the case.
That is not only true, and listeners, I hope, are very excited to talk about this subject. If you know about it, this actually the whole like people being allowed to agree to combat and meet in the street and fight each other actually gave way to an entire superhero movement called the Rain City Superheroes, where people would dress up like superheroes in big rubber suits and like challenge local criminals to fist fights to sort of settle crimes. That include the leader of which being a guy named Phoenix Jones, who was a World Series of Fighting guy. He was a catchweight, and he would just run around the city of Seattle, and he would pummel criminals. Was his whole deal. And as long as the criminals like gave consent before fighting him, he could legally fight them, and he would frequently win. Does this story end well? No, it does not, because first of all, he was arrested for he used pepper spray to break up a fight, which is not. You have to agree to a fight in Seattle. So he saw 2 other people fighting and pulled out pepper spray, which is assault. He spent 7 hours in jail. He went to court. He retired and then started patrolling the streets under his real name, which is Ben Fodder. And he was. I'll read verbatim what he said to the public. I will continue to patrol with my team, probably tonight. In addition to being Phoenix Jones, I am also Ben Fodder, father and brother. I am just like everybody else. The only difference is that I try to stop crime in my neighborhood and everywhere else. I think I have to look toward the future and see what I can do to help the city. Beat. On January 9th, 2020, Jones was arrested for allegedly selling MDMA to an undercover police officer. At the time of his arrest, police alleged he and his accomplice were also in possession of 4 grams of cocaine. So that's how that ends. That is
that's just bizarre.
That is apparently if you try to challenge criminals to a fight while you're dressed as a superhero, sometimes you're not well in the head, and sometimes you also deal drugs on the side.
That's just bizarre. I wish we got an episode where Frasier fought crime as a superhero.
As if he dressed up in a big rubber suit and fought crime as the Crane. Ah, that would be good. I would like that a lot.
So I think we've talked about just about everything we set out to talk about in this episode. Wes, you had a favorite joke you wanted to talk about?
I did. So one of my favorite. I like this joke because it plays off of the history of the characters set up in the first 3 episodes. But I think it's also the kind of joke where if this was your first episode coming in, you could enjoy it on a very similar level. I really liked the very beginning scene. It was, I think, very well written television, and I hope it gives way to future bits where you have multiple things going on at the same time. In the first scene, there's sort of an A story where Frazier is upset because Eddie keeps looking at him, and there is a pre-established story set up in the last episode where Niles is very, very interested in Daphne whenever they're in the same room together. And the setup to the bit is Frasier is ready to have dinner. Everybody's sitting at the table, and Martin insists they're doing some praying. Martin insists, "Hey, don't you guys say grace?" And Frasier's like, "Oh, of course, all the time." Yeah, they
didn't say grace in the last episode when they were at dinner.
Well, yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's true. There wasn't any grace saying at the old lumber mill, which is, yeah. So Martin starts saying a prayer, and as Frasier gets impatient, he realizes that Eddie is still staring at him. While this is happening, Niles is also taking a gander at Daphne, who has her head bowed in prayer. As Eddie is staring at Frasier yells, "Will you stop staring?" And then the camera cuts very quickly to Niles, who says, "I'm not." And I thought it was not only was it, I think, a well-written bit, it played very well off the characters. I think it was very well performed by David Hyde Pierce and Kelsey Grammer. I just thought it was a very, very good piece of sitcom comedy.
I would agree with you. I also liked the bit. I like that whole scene where Daphne is, doing the psychic reading of the evidence, the photos on Martin's desk, and she's predicting, she's seeing, the man we know as Frasier walking down the hallway, and then he opens up the door. That reveal I thought was very funny.
That was it was a very funny episode from beginning to end.
All right. Well, I guess that about does it for I Hate Frasier Crane. Let's see what we got coming up next. We've got our next episode that I don't have pulled up yet because I always forget to do this part.
Here's Looking at You.
Yeah, Frasier plays matchmaker for his father, and the eligible bachelorette Martin spied through his telescope.
Oh.
So apparently we're going to get some romance between Martin and another female character.
Ooh, very interesting. Very interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you once again for joining us on the Frasier on Frasier podcast. I have been Adam Frasier.
I'm Wes Corwin.
Thank you for listening, and good night.